Hello, welcome in. If you're here listening to this podcast, that means you are destined for something great, and we both know it to be true. So without further ado, welcome to the Dark Matter Podcast. Hello, and welcome back to the Dark Matter Podcast. It's your host, Dev, and today we've got another guest in Tigrilla Gardenia, a nature-inspired life coach and founder of the Naturally Conscious community. Tigrilla's work bridges personal growth, ecological intelligence, and plant wisdom, helping creative, multi-passionate people step out of systems that were never designed for them and into lives that feel aligned, authentic, and alive. With decades of experience across art, technology, and eco-social innovation, she brings a perspective that reconnects personal evolution with the intelligence of the natural world. I'm super excited for this conversation with you. Welcome to the Dark Matter Show.
Thank you so much, Dev. I'm really actually excited to be here.
Likewise. I know you do a lot of work with the natural world, and I guess, the first question as we kind of get into this is your work invites people to partner with nature rather than force themselves into rigid systems. So when did you realize that those systems weren't built for you?
Birth, birth. I'm telling you, birth. I was definitely the black sheep of the family. I'll give you an example of how I discovered that systems weren't meant for me. I was in elementary school. I can't even tell you what grade, probably whatever, fourth grade or something like that. And I remember being taken by my teacher. My desk was grabbed, and it was back then, it used to be, I'm a little older. So you would walk into the classroom on the right hand side, like was a wall where the chalkboard was. And then there was all the desks like looking at the chalkboard with the teacher at the front of the class. My desk got pulled to the front of the class and put up against the front wall right under the chalkboard to the right
Mm.
because I would consistently get on my report card, learns concepts fast, then distracts the others. Like, because I would learn super fast what they were teaching, and then I would go on to chit chat with everybody. And I was like, how's it going? What's going on? So the way that they appeased me was in class, they did that. Luckily, I have older brothers. My brothers are like 8 and 10 years older than I am. So they used to give me their books, not because I was brilliant, but because I learned fast, which is very different from like a general kind of intelligence where somebody's like, whatever, a Sheldon from, Big Bang Theory or something like that. I wasn't a prodigy. I just learned in a lot of different ways from a lot of different inputs, and then I would get bored. So yes, birth. Birth is when I discovered that systems don't work for me.
It's a very humble approach to that because I feel like other people in your situation may be like, no, I'm brilliant, or like I'm a genius, or I can learn pretty quick. And I can just, picture that too, where someone's really understanding the information. It kind of makes me think of like Mike Ross from Suits, where he just has a mind for it. Like once he understands it, he never forgets it. And then, so it
Right.
kind of takes me into that, right?
Yeah, and I think that that was the place where I started to see, obviously it took me years before I started to conceptualize it and understand, but that's where I started to see that there was different forms of intelligence. I've always been a multi-potentialite, a multi-passionate person, so I loved math in school. I excelled in math. Like, for example, I graduated high school with level 2 calculus. There was only 5 kids in my class for the last 2 years of my high school who were in the same level of math that we were. So there was only 5 of us. And it
Mm.
was a huge school. I mean, I went to one of the largest schools in the United States at the time. And so I realized I had the math thing, but I was also in band, and I also, loved social sciences, and I ended up kind of like excelling in social science. I had all these different inputs. And then I loved music, but I wasn't necessarily a musician, which was another weird concept. My bachelor's is in music engineering and electrical engineering, but I thought I was going to go to law school first because I was on the debate team. So I was ping ponging engineering over here, maths and engineering over here, and social sciences and politics over there, and over here, music, and over here, like dance and all these different pieces and theater and all of it mixed together. But I wasn't, first of all, the person on the stage necessarily. I did a lot of stuff in the background.
Mm,
That was a mind thing to like get to the concept that I could be a creative but not be on the stage.
mm,
And then the fact that I would come off the stage and go to like math club was just really bizarre for a lot of people. They're like, what do you mean wait, no, creatives are creatives and math geeks are math geeks. And I was like, well, I'm kind of both.
mm,
So that was where I started to see that we get told jack of all trades, master of none,
right.
which I think is bull. I'm not going to
Mm,
curse on your show without your permission.
right.
So, but I think it's such bull, and it's something that we unfortunately try to teach the idea of discipline, go focus, do one thing only, because if not, you're not going to be good at anything. And that's hogwash. It's
Mm,
such a horrible thing because we're not recognizing the amount of talent that goes into being good at lots of stuff. That's a different skill set.
mm,
It's what made me such an amazing project manager when I used to work at Microsoft, or, what allowed me to go into the real networks, which was the beginning of the internet, of radio on the internet, because I had these multiple sides to myself. I could understand that type of technology, but a lot of people tried to kill it along the way.
Do you think there's a lot of challenges with that? Because what you're saying here is that, you kind of had your hands in so many baskets and you could go all in with all of them, but like you chose to continue just feeling what was good for you. And I feel like that's a challenging piece for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people struggle with self-doubt and scarcity, when it comes to this kind of stuff because maybe they don't fit the mold. In your experience, like what do you see there and what does that mean towards belonging and self-worth even?
Yeah, that's a really great question because it is true. Our society is based on the idea of excelling means being really good at one thing or one domain. Like you see a musician that plays lots of instruments, but it's still we think of them and we label them as musician, right?
Mm,
And or a creative, so you can do art and music and this and that. For example, Queen, most of the members of Queen went on to get, I think one was like a physicist, they did such amazing stuff that was outside of that norm. We just don't hear about it. So I think for me, I got lucky that to a certain extent, my mother let me explore. I did struggle with it, but she let me explore. And I remember when I did my freshman year in Boston University, and then I decided I did not want to go to law school, and that's a whole other story as to why I chose it. And I came back to Miami and went and started to look around and say, what are the things that are consistent in my life? And at that time, the two most prominent pieces of my life was math, as I said, and music, right? But I wasn't a musician necessarily. So I was like, eh. But all my friends were musicians, and I went to lots of concerts and I listened to music, and music which will tie into what I do today with nature in a minute. So I was like, I discovered music engineering, and the number one school in the country was in my backyard, right? It was in my hometown. And so I came back, and it was interesting because my brother, who is very straight to a certain extent, he had gone to his backup and he had done civil engineering. He worked in civil engineering for like 6 months, realized he hated it. And I was like, I told you, like, why did you wanted to be an architect? But he wanted to go safe. And so he got a civil engineering degree. So he was trying to get me to go into civil engineering. And I was like, no, I'm going to do music engineering. He's like, what are you going to do with that? I'm like, "Ugh, we'll discover it when I get there." And I did 3 different internships while I was in college. I did radio station. I was the intern for REM when they did the Monster album. And I was also an intern to a band, like some really big bands in South Florida at that time. And the point being was like, I got lucky enough that I had a mom who was supportive, who trusted me to say, you're going to do something because you're ambitious enough to want to do things. and I'm just going to let you, because, okay, do it, try. What's the, what's the worst that can happen? And I literally would do any opportunity. I would think about any opportunity I was doing as to how it connected to what I wanted to be doing eventually. So, all these little odd jobs that I think for most people, you think about them just for making money. I was doing odd jobs because I was picking up skills. Like that's how my mind was working. And I think that
Mm,
that really helped to look at the lateral pieces. That doesn't mean I didn't have moments. I mean, the whole jack of all trades, master of none things really does screw with your head. Definitely does. But you get to a point where you realize, I think maybe because it was the beginning of the internet, there was a lot more exploration and innovation happening, and there was a lot more possibilities that I realized, okay, wait a minute, let me see what I can build here from all of this. And I just played around. I followed an instinct that I didn't even realize I was following. In my mind, it was always safe. But for other people, I've been told, they were like, how do you do that? You just like jumped into that. And I was like, well, in my mind, it was safe because I had a job or I had this possibility or something like that. So I created the safety for myself.
mm. And I think that's so powerful for the listeners to really like kind of grasp that gem there because I feel like that's kind of it. We all have an internal compass on what makes us feel good and the direction that we should go. And the only time where things become out of alignment is when you start listening to external factors, right? And other people telling you their own challenges their own
Right.
beliefs, right? And I feel like that's a big thing. And I do eventually want to get into like what you do today because hearing how you had your, all these interests and like you would take all those things. A quick point to that too. I love that point of view as well of just looking at everything as like the experience. And for me, when I started my entrepreneurship journey, it was back in 2019. I did door-to-door sales. No one gets into door-to-door sales thinking that's going to be their full-time career and all those things. But what I did know is that that chapter would help my work ethic. It would help my ability to handle rejection, right? And how do I keep showing up? And it would really increase a lot of the attributes and skills and the talents that I didn't have. And so even though I did it for the 2 years, now I can take those skills and the things that I've learned and move to that next piece, right? And so the question I have here for you, because I feel like this is going to be a great answer and I am excited to hear what you have to say, but fear often shows up when people they slow down and they start listening inward. So what fears tend to surface when someone begins to reconnect with, nature and like just listening to their own internal guidance system?
Yeah, I would say in that particular case, it's kind of almost the opposite, which is really interesting. I think we live in this constant state of fear. Like you had said earlier, we live in this self-doubt and all these worries. And when I first started working with plants, so my kind of plant reawakening was a music story. I was sitting, so I live in this place called Damanhur. It's one of the largest spiritual communities in the world. It's an esoteric community, and we're in northern Italy. And I was walking down one of our areas and I heard this music. And like I said, music has always been kind of my guiding star, right? It's the thing that allows me to understand the world. It's how I communicate and connect with the world. Like there's a lot, it's how I process because I'm a verbal processor. So like there's a lot of elements to that. And this music was really unusual. So I followed it and I ended up at a box that was like a speaker that was connected to a box that was connected to a plant. And it's this device called the music of the plants, and it's literally a musical instrument for plants. It allows plants to make music. And in that moment, I was staring at this plant going, oh my goodness, you're talking to me. Like you're having a conversation with me in this moment. And it was just instantaneous, like awakening of pieces. And that's where I started to get into it again, going safe first, because in my mind, I have to find the foundation, the safety part of it. And the safety part was the science, right? I was an engineer, I was a music engineer. I mean, this was my terrain
Mm,
from the perspective of the music in and of itself. And then there was this unknown piece, which was the plants. And as I started to connect and understand the science behind plant intelligence, plant communication, and that developed my own kind of more abilities to connect and communicate with the plants, which again, I can always give both very woo woo answers and very scientific answers. Like, ask me which one you need, I will happily give it to you and I can do the bridging between them.
mm.
But the point being was, I had been, by that point in my life, spent an enormous amount of time trying to quote unquote change myself, right? I felt like I had all these negative attributes and characteristics. These were the things that were holding me back from achieving the goals that I really had, and blah, 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 and all these different pieces. And it was working with the plants in that way and understanding how ecosystems work, and which is that reconnection to nature, the fact that I am part of the ecosystem, right? Because I am a being of nature. I am a natural in my own way. That I realized that all these traits that I've been putting into these negative terms actually are just traits I didn't know how to use. And that in an ecosystem, there is no garbage can. You don't throw things away. You might compost them, but that means that they become nourishment for somebody else.
Mm.
Or you might use them only in very select circumstances. And that even the most destructive characteristic, which are the ones that, of course, we all think we're supposed to get rid of, can actually be really useful because you sometimes do need to compost or destroy in order to create, right? There's creation and destruction are not two sides of a coin. It's kind of like there's a song in Rent that says the opposite of war isn't peace, it's creation, because war destroys and you create after that from the whole that gets created. And that piece connected with the fact that I am a being of nature, which means everything in the natural world I can connect to on some level, all of a sudden took a bunch of fears that I had and just toned down the volume because it says, what are you afraid of? Like, you can survive in nature because you are nature. You can use everything that you are to create or to destroy consciously. Like, all of a sudden, all those little voices that were always playing around, the doubts, the this, the da, 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 got put into a different context that wasn't right or wrong, but it was, how do I learn how to use them? And
Mm.
then the fear doesn't control you anymore because now you feel empowered. You're like, oh, I can't be a total raging bitch, but that could be super useful if the person in front of me is somebody who needs a good smacking. Like, it's not a horrible thing. I don't use it when somebody's being nice to me. I don't use it just because I'm upset. I use it when that person or that circumstance needs that type of response in order for us to move everything forward.
Hmm.
Hopefully that made sense.
It does. And this is actually so interesting. Have you ever heard of spirit science? It's on YouTube there.
No, I haven't.
So it's actually really interesting, and it's like a cross between science and it's a cross between like consciousness and spiritual awakenings and things. And there was this one episode, my girlfriend actually had watched it. This was probably over a decade ago now, and it was on animals, and they were saying how you can actually communicate with
Mhm.
animals. And so when you understand that you can communicate with an animal, then there's a certain level of consciousness. It's like we are one, and this is all of the oneness. And as I mentioned in our conversation, we were going back and forth. That was a big reason that stemmed her trajectory. Now she's fully plant-based and she's been plant-based for 12 years. Now I'm plant-based as well because I understand that animals and plants and trees, like it's all being, it's all one level of consciousness. And so I know you
You
talk a
do
lot
realize
about,
that you're eating plants that are conscious too, right?
and that's difficult, right? Because they are conscious. But then how do you sustain yourself then if it's not even just,
Oh, I can answer the question, but vegans hate me, just so you know. They
oh,
like
really?
they well, because so where I live, our concept isn't so much about what you eat, right? Because as you said, I'm a being of nature, and if you go and you look in nature in the most whatever you consider nature, doesn't matter, animals, plants, whatever, there is a reciprocal exchange, right? Just the same as you have plants that are carnivorous, you have animals that are plant-based, and you have a mix of in between, right? So, and I don't want to derail the conversation. We can go wherever you want to go with it, but we have to understand that it isn't so much about a categorical what you eat. It is about the relationship you have with your food and the fact of, are you taking enough for sustenance and also being sustenance back in whatever way that that might look, right? Which could be from allowing your body to decompose naturally in a, natural cemetery so that you become food in the future. It might be controlling the amount you eat because maybe you live in an area where certain types of beings don't grow, and therefore I'm not going to import it because that pollutes, because that piece. It's about how do I form the relationships that are necessary. And where I live, for example, right in front of me, there's a giant meadow. And in that meadow, we still have the old fashioned shepherds that come from the mountains and like walk through and take their, pasture, all of their cows and sheep and goats. So I periodically will have cows and sheep and goat. And there's a relationship I have with those animals. And I also have a relationship with the wild plants that grow here and with the plants that we do cultivate. And there's this relationship of how do we keep the entire ecosystem healthy? So
Mm,
therefore, I kind of say that the best quote unquote diet to keep you healthy is to reconnect to nature. Because when you reconnect to nature, you will realize that you will not overindulge the way you used to,
mm,
not because you feel disciplined or because you feel like you have to, but because there's like this reciprocal thing of if you gave your life for me, whether you're a broccoli, whether you're a steak, whether you're cauliflower, you gave your life for me. I
mm,
don't want to misuse that sacrifice that you gave to me.
mm.
So to me, it's all about the relationship.
Right. And that's a great way to look at it too. I think as a whole, right? Because and that's why even like free range or when you do your own hunting, it is a lot of, and I think it even goes back to like the indigenous populations, right? Like they always used to have like ceremonies and they almost kind of worshipped the animals because they understand it is an exchange, right? So what is like connecting with nature? Like when you say that, what does that mean?
For me, that is about realizing that we are, as you said, we are one in the sense of our source is the same, right? We evolved from plants. We are animals, right? So I have a certain amount of plantness to a certain extent in me.
Mm,
I have that part of me that is presence and stillness, that is sessile, that is grounded into what I do. And there's an exchange of many, there's a reciprocal exchange that's happening, not just at the food level, but breath, right? There is the shared oxygen and carbon dioxide that we're sharing back and forth. There is the food perspective. There's an electromagnetic exchange that's happening because that grounding feeling I have when I step on the earth without any kind of shoes is an electromagnetic exchange that's happening between my body and the plant. So being and reconnecting back to nature is realizing and feeling inside of yourself that you are a being of nature and therefore you're in exchange. Now, for people that it happens, it happens in different ways. That is what wakens that whole communication, right?
mm,
I can exchange with an animal, I can exchange with a plant, I can have conversation in whatever form that takes. That might be a feeling, it might be a literal, like, almost telepathic conversation. It might be a guidance that you feel you're receiving. It might be that nervous system that calms down when I smell all of those terpenes or those volatile organic compounds that plants give off, right? I breathe those in and my cortisol level drops. That's all because I'm in relation, right, with the plants. So once I recognize myself as a being of nature and I allow myself to then step back into those natural cycles. Right now, where I live, we're getting into winter time, right? The fall has been and is for nature in general a period of double check your nourishment, bring in the things that have nourished you throughout this year. And that's where you see, when you see leaves change color, what's happening is that the chlorophyll is being pulled back into the plant, and any kind of nourishment that the plant might be able to use during the winter season is actually being pulled back into the plant. And what you're seeing, those yellows and reds and vibrant oranges, are actually other compounds that the plant has always had, but during the winter time doesn't need. And
mm,
so the plant allows that to stay in the leaves and then that gets composted down. So, as a human being, how beautiful to take this time because I am also a being of nature. I'm in a place right now where I'm in autumn and I'm
mm,
heading into winter. So I'm finishing that period, right? I have another week left before the solstice. I'm finishing that period of bringing that nourishment back. I'm slowing down. I'm starting to look at my life and start to think about what do I need to bring. What are the foods that need to change because my digestion is going to change in this period? So I get back into that rhythm. And during the winter, I also know that it's a time for reflection. It's a time for me to use my internal nourishment. I don't need to build out new projects right now. I can conceptualize them, I can start to design them, but I don't have the energy to like really do them because that's not what the season is for. So stepping closer, moving into all of these natural cycles that gives us permission to recognize I take a nap in the middle of the day because that's what my natural rhythm is like, right? My natural rhythm works in this way. I slow down during the, holiday season because that's a natural winter cycle for those of us that live in places that have winter in this period of time. So all of these small little changes that happen when I recognize that I'm a being of nature and that I can tap back into these universal processes and feel that unity consciousness that you were talking about earlier as a part of me. So I'm always simultaneously three things. I am an observer of nature, I am a participant in nature, and I am nature. And
Hmm.
when I can live these three, I can move from those different points of view with ease. And that allows me to navigate my day, not so much from my thought and my discipline, and you must do it this way and you have to be focused, but more from, oh, at this period of the day, I'm really active. And in this period of the day, I take a nap. And in this period of the day, I'm strategic. And in this period of the day, I'm more creative. And in this period of the day, I like to talk. And in this period of the day, I don't like to talk. You start to realize that those are natural cycles of yourself and you accept them rather than try to fight them.
Hmm. Again, very, very powerful way to say that. Um, and I think as you're saying it too, like I'm visualizing it, and there's so many things that you can do with connecting. And I think you said grounding, like grounding is a big thing. I know grounding,
Huge.
really and powerful. I think even something like this, like as you're talking, what I'm kind of seeing is like connecting with nature isn't a binary, it's a continuum. It's not I've
Yes.
connected with nature, it's how connected are you? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and for someone who is connecting or wanting to connect more because again now we live in a day and age where AI is bigger than it's ever been, people are more distracted and disconnected than they've ever been. What's a practical way or like just a process that people can really do to take these steps into their own hands to really connect with nature today if they wanted to?
Yeah, I always say that the best is to just take a minute with a house plant, with the grass in front of your house, with something that's growing out of the sidewalk crack. There's so many different, a street tree. It doesn't have to be like, "Oh, I need to go pack and go camping into the middle of nowhere." Great if you can do it, not necessary. Even just stopping with your house plant, right? You have this beautiful plant, you have a plant in your background, right? And stopping and taking a moment when you're really stressed out and just breathing together. Like imagining that as you breathe in, consciously calling in the oxygen that this plant is giving. And as you breathe out, feel yourself giving carbon dioxide that the plant then takes in
Mm,
and step back into that reciprocal exchange. Feel that harmony, even if you just do it for 2 minutes. 2 minutes is all it takes. If you can do it for 20, even better. But even just 2 minutes is fantastic. And that helps you retap. We don't have to go so far out. We can start to kind of activate that biophilic, that love of nature connection that we have through small, simple things. Even as we're doing audio, but I can see you because we have a video on, and I can see, for example, I'll give you a great example. It sounds so silly, but the lamp behind you, as you notice, has a pattern on it, right? Which means the light that comes out of it isn't a stark light. It's a light that is dampered. It has like a shape. That is very much a natural connection to light that you would experience if I go outside and then the light comes through the leaves, right?
mm,
I have that. So that already starts to trigger pieces of me. It reactivates my own natural way of being. So light that moves in some ways in a very gentle way, simple breath with plants, and if you have the opportunity, like you said, take off your shoes and put your feet onto the ground. Even if your ground is relatively natural, I have marble, right? But it's marble, it's a natural element.
Hmm.
So unless your floor is something really contrived, but if it's, tile, if it's something even just remotely natural, put your feet there and feel, even if it's cold or if it's hot, like these teeny tiny things that you can do anywhere will already shift the way that you interact with the rest of your day.
Hmm. Practical and simple. It's,
Practical.
you know, a master is a master of the basics, right? And I think, like you're saying,
Yes.
a lot of people, it's a very all or nothing. It's like, oh, you want me to connect with nature? Okay, I need to go plan a 7 day trip. Where it's like, no, you can just spend 2 minutes with any of the plants in your house, or if you don't have any plants in the house, then just go stand outside in your backyard or your front yard. Like you don't have to, really go anywhere. So.
Yep.
I know you speak a lot about plant intelligence,
Mhm.
and I want you to kind of open this up a little bit here. I know you speak a lot about having plant intelligence as a guide. What does that mean? Like, what does a practical relationship look like with that?
Yeah, so that can mean depending on how you want to approach it, right? So plants inherently have a series of we they don't have brains, right? So neuroscientists, if you're listening, I apologize to you because you're not going to get it, but try, which is the idea that every single being has their own form of intelligence, right? We know plants have all the same five senses we do, plus they have about another 15 other senses. So we know they take in information. We know they have memory and can hold that information. We know they can process and have decision making process from that information. In other words, they can take in information, they can connect that to their past information, and then they can make decisions for the future based on all that. These are just some of the simple pieces that we've already learned about. And so plants have a very different logic because their logic is based on I'm sessile, right? I can't move. I can't run away because plants can move, but they don't run away. We as humans, unfortunately, have been conditioned to run away from our problems because we have legs. Plants can't do that. So they've had to develop a way to be extremely aware while at the same time selective of their use of the information that's coming their way. So,
Mm,
on the one hand, extremely open. And when we start to work with a plant, and I'll get to how in a minute, once I start to work with a plant, I start to learn how to expand my senses while not going into overwhelm because I can be selective on how I choose to bring that information in. Also, plants teach us, even if you just work with plants, so you can work with plants as mentors, as models, and as collaborators. So let's go to models because I think it's the easiest for most people to grasp. Think about all the things a plant does, adapting to different forms of temperature and changes to their environment relatively quickly. I mean, if anybody who has a house plant who is probably a tropical plant and you've brought into your winter wonderland in Canada and that survives, you know that that plant has learned how to adapt. So there's many different models that a plant is developing in order to be able to adapt, to make decisions and such that we can then work with as beings of nature that takes us out of our human conditioning, which is usually based on what's in it for me and fear. A lot more fear than anything else. So this already gives me new models for dealing with the world. Also new relationships. As humans, we think about things like I love you, you're my girlfriend, boyfriend, friend of 1,000 years, or my parent, or familial, or these types of things. Plants have lots of other relationships: parasitism, predation, commensalisms, like collaboration, of which they have no stigma around. They're built on what is best for that moment, what is best for what's happening in the ecosystem and for the ones that they're interacting with. So that gives us a whole other set of models to help us feel more comfortable in the things that we do without putting all of this labeling on it.
mm,
And so, one easy way to start working with plants is that, right? How do I look at those models and say, how do those models apply to me? And where can I interact with them? And then you can keep building on that, like plants as mentors. So, specific plants that you then maybe give you information. Again, coming through those senses that I might not know, but just breathing in those all of those organic compounds that they put out, I'm already receiving from them. It might trigger biological pieces of me, but it also is triggering other pieces that I might not have recognized also. So even that, and then you can get onto plant communication, for example, and many different people who receive messages. And I believe because we're beings of nature, we all have the ability to do that. And for example, this morning, I have a plant that you can't see on camera, but is my business partner. And so we sit and we do strategy meetings. And I sit and I connect and then I listen and I allow my body to receive from this plant. And sometimes it's automatic writing, sometimes it's movement and a feeling. It comes in a lot of different ways. And I also teach many of these different aspects and work with it in my coaching of how do you start to realize that the answers to the questions that I have are myself. I have knowledge, but I can also merge that knowledge with all the other beings that are around me.
Hmm. Yeah, this is a very interesting, and I feel like we could spend so much time on this here, this one topic, because I feel like it's refreshing in today's day and age, and I think it's necessary. And I think the world is coming back to a time where connectedness and consciousness is going to really tap in. And, we can get into like the 3D and the 5D and the separation
Right.
and all of those things. But I do want to just quickly segue apart here because I mean, we talked about your story and how you had hands in so many different, jars, and then you realize that, what it is you can be a jack of all trades, and that's a good thing, and it's a
Mhm.
powerful thing, and you can really do that. So what happens after? So what was that journey for you? And then now what do you like, how did you get to where you are today, and what is it that you do today?
Yeah, so it's so much fun because I get excited about it because again, working with plants helped me put it all together. So in when you study something like, for example, biomimicry, which is bio-inspired design, and I have a master's in vegetal future, so it's plant social innovation and design. And so I love social innovation. Like I said, even though math was my forte for so long, it's been the social kind of parts that has always excited me. I love human relations and such. And when you start looking at something like ecosystems, for example, and I start to think about it from an ecosystem design perspective, many species have what in biomimicry is called a deep pattern. It is the form of expression, like one main pattern that when you recognize that pattern, you no longer have to create 1,000 different rules. You can create a very small set of rules that allow that pattern to show. So, an example that often gets used that I think is such a brilliant way of putting it is swarms of birds. Beautiful birds moving in these complex patterns, right? If you look up at a sky at a swarm of birds or a school of fish, they're moving in such interesting ways because they have one rule, only one. The rule is the distance between their partners from one side to the other, right? The distance to whom's next to me. So what happens is as a bird moves, the one next to says, "Oh, I got to stay with you." And then as that bird moves, then the others say, "Oh, I got to stay with you." And this creates super complex movement and allows them to travel long distances, staying very compact together with one rule.
Hmm.
So once you recognize yourself as a being of nature, you start to realize that you probably have a deep pattern that you follow as well. For example, my pattern that put all these different pieces together, and it's one of the things I help my clients discover is my pattern is I'm a bridge. In other words, at a very high level, I mean, it gets more detailed than that. I'm always looking to bridge from A to B. So that might be taking a client from where they are to who they want to be. It might be taking a project from beginning to end, which means I'm a better project manager than an in depth feature person. When I worked at Microsoft and they tried to put me into a feature, I could not do it. But give me a project to release, even I used to work on Windows. I loved it because I could look at how do I help people bridge their gaps and move to the places that they need to go to. When I started to go back in my life, I used to always say that one of my favorite things to do is I love to make other people's dreams come true because I'm a bridge. I accompany you from one place to the other. I don't have to be the innovator of the idea. I don't have to be the one that figures out all of the like mechanics. I want to be there to bring the whole thing across or the person across. So that's my deep pattern. And once I started to realize that, It didn't matter what the heck I was doing. When I worked with REM, when I was at Microsoft, when I was with Cirque du Soleil, when I had my own event production company, when I was working here in Dom and Her on our projects, like it doesn't matter what I do as long as I'm always experiencing it as the bridge.
Mm.
That is the thing that connects everything and allows me to not have to think about discipline or focus because I know that I'm always expressing the best part of me in that way. And that's my ecosystem design. So, a lot of the work I do is helping people discover that ecosystem design. And because I have such a varied background, I don't care where you're working. You could be in corporate, you can be in tech. And I might talk a lot about nature, and I do, and I spend a lot of time in nature. But I'm a tech girl at heart. I've been in tech since I was 20 something years old, 23 years old. So I've been in tech a very long time, right? I saw the birth of the internet and how everything grew. And I participated in the AI world when it was machine learning. Like, I have been in this world a long time. I don't try to tell you to get out of it. I try to help you live it as a being of nature so that
Mm.
you can enjoy it without getting yourself sick, without burning out, without feeling like you have to conform to a bunch of rules that don't fit you. And where you feel like no matter where you are in that ever changing world, because man, does the world change fast now, your deep pattern expresses itself. So you don't actually care what you're doing. You just care that you're doing it because you're doing it in a way that fills you.
Right. How different is this to something like human design, for example?
The thing about human design is human focused. And there's the problem with it that unfortunately you have that fear model injected into it to a certain extent.
Mm.
And human design, from the perspective of helps you understand your pattern. So it does help you understand a lot of aspects. The deep pattern goes beyond it, encompasses it. And I guess that's also part of it. Being a multipotentialite means you can, like, I'm a projector, right? So knowing that I'm a projector, knowing that I need to be asked, right? I need to have that happen. I tell my friends, like, I feel comfortable enough because that's my nature to say to my friend, I mean, I remember calling one of my friends one day and I said, listen to me. I want to cook for you. Like, I would love to have you come over my house. I am never going to invite you because I need you to invite yourself. I need you to invite me to things because my human design is this thing. So if I'm going to bridge this gap, because I'm a bridge, the way I bridge the gap is by telling people what I need. I don't feel bad for having to have the invitation. And I also don't need, will you do this? I can see the broad invitation because I know my deep pattern connected to my human design, connected to my astrology, connected to this or that or the other.
Mm.
So it allows me to see a bigger ecosystem project, right? Like how all these different threads of the ecosystem work in. And I don't feel bad about the fact that that's who I am. I don't try to change the idea that I need an invitation.
Mm.
I tell people, I need this. So if you want me to work on a project, I'm most likely not going to just start it. I need you to invite me.
Mm. I think that's extremely well said and a golden gem for people that are listening because it's one thing to know your human design. I myself is a projector as well. And so for me, I get that. You need the invitation, right? We need it because the hardest thing for us are not self-theme is the bitterness, right? And so
Hmm.
the thing that we hate the most is when we provide information or insights to people and it goes, unheard. And it stresses me out, honestly. And I
Right.
get to a point where it's like, I want to help and I can help you, but like unless you ask, or if I do share and you didn't ask, then there's always that discrepancy, right? So I
Right.
love this as like the deep pattern as the thing to really help understand because that's the missing piece for a lot of people. They might know their human design and it's this and that's helpful, but then how do you then like yours is bridging the gap, but some people aren't that focused. Like for me,
Oh,
it's hard to bridge the gap because I don't naturally go to that, right? To just
right.
explain and communicate what it is. So I think this is helpful. And I think for a lot of people, if you are like, I think this sort of work could be useful, like you said, for anyone because you have a unique background in just about everything, right? So it's pretty
Yeah.
incredible.
It's what I've always loved. And I love that it takes it working in this way and really understanding myself as natural, just using that term, beyond reconnection to nature and all these things. The fact that I am natural means that I stopped at some point when I started working with plants this deeply, I stopped looking for the thing to get rid of about myself. And I
Mm,
started asking the question differently. How do I use that? Where do I use that? Like, where is that useful to me, even if it's destructive or whether or whatever it is? Like, the questions start to shift because you stop thinking, oh, something's wrong with me. This is a trauma response. This is, even if it is, that's natural because when you hit a tree, right? I'm reading a book. I have a plant wisdom book club, and I'm reading a book right now where it's called The Tree, and it's about a specific Douglas fir. And the author was saying how the tree has a really crooked sort of trunk. And one day he finally realized, because he's a zoologist, so he's an animal person. And he's like, why am I writing a book about a tree? And he's like, because I started to really observe and connect with this tree in a different way. And he says, one of the things I noticed is that the tree has this very unusual shape, which means, wait a minute, when I think about the birth of this tree, which the tree was born around the time of Shakespeare, the tree, that the angle that I'm used to getting from, what one part of my land to another part was actually much steeper, which means the tree had to adapt in order to grow up. So that's why there's this giant, and then the land, because he went back, changed again, and there was another kind of direction. And then my house was built and my property and stuff, so that it has a different direction. So he says the tree has this strange shape because the tree has had to adapt to that environment. Now,
mm,
when I look at that, do I think something is wrong with the tree? No, but the tree experienced three forms of trauma, right? If I want to use human terms, it's using three forms of trauma. But that the plant doesn't say, oh, I have to get rid of this bend. The plant incorporates the bend in and finds a way to be healthy and strong and whatever, using what was learned from that bend.
mm,
Imagine if we could do that. Stop trying to just eliminate things and instead said, what did I get from this? And what can I use?
mm. Yeah, I love that because we live in such a day and age where it's like I wish I wasn't so lazy, or I wish I had better discipline, or I wish I had all these things, and it's like, yeah, but you are the way that you are for a reason. If you learn to, they're kind of like your gifts, right? It makes you
It,
uniquely you, and I love the idea of connecting with nature and shifting. It's like shifting your internal perspective and the narratives to understand that those things, sure, in this sort of limelight in like way that you're looking at it doesn't fit, but where else could that be useful? This has been incredible. For the listener that gets all the way here, what is like your favorite like final kind of send off message to those that this is kind of like if they get to this point, if they didn't take anything away, which I don't know how they could have from this entire thing, but if they didn't take anything away, what would that one final send off be to leave the listeners with here today?
the most important thing for me is to recognize that you are natural. Every thought that comes through your mind, every feeling that you have, every experience that you have is completely natural. And that you have the power to decide how to use it. And that nature helps us find that definition. And that definition is constantly going to be changing also. The idea that you're not static. So you're natural, you're constantly changing, and everything about you can be useful in the right context. So I often say in the right duration, the right dosage, and the right direction. And you can use anything about yourself.
Hmm. I love that. That's such a great message. Tigrilla, this has been incredible. Where can the listeners find more about you, what you're up to, and connect with you going forward?
The positive of having an unusual name means that I'm basically at Tigrilla Gardenia, which I'm sure you'll tell them how to spell it everywhere. So .com, at Facebook, at Instagram, at LinkedIn, like all of it is just at Tigrilla Gardenia. YouTube, I have a podcast as well, which is Reconnect with Plant Wisdom, but you'll find that also on my website. So super easy.
I'll leave all the links down below. I highly recommend going and checking it out. And there's just so many things that you can really take away from this. And yeah, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on. And for the listener, of course, thank you so much for being active, tuning in, and sharing the show. We're currently in 37 countries and growing, so super exciting. Love seeing the growth of it all. Thank you so much. And as always, I'll catch you on the next one. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, comment, share, subscribe to it all. You know I appreciate it. And as always, I'll catch you on the next one.